Hey everybody, filming from a different location this evening, so hope you don't mind the change of scenery. But I wanted to talk with you guys about something that I know everybody is dealing with right now across this country. And it's a common thread in a number of areas of your life that has changed over the last month. Things that may seem unrelated, but if you're familiar with the topic, then you're instantly aware of exactly what's going on across the country, why it's happening. So one of the things that we're seeing, toilet paper jokes abound because we're suddenly having shortages. Rationing of grocery store items to avoid mass purchasing of specific items, causing stores to sell out. Even with those rationing efforts, many stores are starting to run out of things because they can't keep them stocked quickly enough because people are stockpiling resources out of concern that there may not be more later. Other things include large numbers of people visiting hospitals and other medical facilities when they pick up on more minor symptoms out of fear that something worse might be coming along. All of these are common trends that are associated with something that people in the ecological field, in the field of ecology, in the field of finance, and others all understand to be something known as the tragedy of the commons. Now, if you haven't heard of the tragedy of the commons yet, I'd like to take a minute to just give you some insights into what this is, and it's going to make perfect sense as you go forward here through these next few weeks. What's been happening? So, I want to pull this. There's a lot of places you can go to for information on what this is. I suggest you find more. But I wanted to pull from a particular source here because I want to help folks understand that people in the world of finance, people in the world of government, people who are making decisions about how to distribute resources are well aware of this concept, this phenomenon, and are still acting the way they are. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. So, Investopedia is a source that I'm picking up here. There are many others, like I said. What is the tragedy of the commons? The tragedy of the commons is an economic problem in which every individual has an incentive to consume a resource at the expense of every other individual, with no way to exclude anyone from consuming. It results in overconsumption, underinvestment, and ultimately depletion of the resource. As the demand for the resource overwhelms the supply, every individual who consumes an additional unit directly harms others who can no longer enjoy the benefits. Generally, the resource of interest is easily available to all individuals. The tragedy of the commons occurs when individuals neglect the well being of society in the pursuit of personal gain. So that's just sort of the opening paragraph, and it really isn't a super complicated idea, but one of the things that's difficult for people to grasp is just how much their own respective individual actions can influence the health and well-being of a larger community. When we live in a country with hundreds of millions of people or on a planet with billions of people, it can be difficult, even in a democracy where we like to see our votes counted, and in a Western civilization like ours, where individuality is celebrated, where every person is made to or believes that they have something unique to contribute. These kinds of ideas can be difficult to wrestle with because we can feel small, but at the same time, we feel entitled, right? Insignificant, but entitled. This is a weird combination, and this isn't just something, by the way, that's limited to Americans or the West or anything like that. This is a human condition. The combination of feeling insignificant but entitled is an extremely unfortunate and extremely common, combination that we're going to see in humanity as a species. And what I'm getting at here is when people feel like they deserve something or are owed more or a better share or a bigger piece of the pie than their neighbor, And they also have the feeling that their decisions, that their impact on the larger society, it must be relatively minute. The end result is that people will make decisions to hoard items or resources or wealth in a way that ultimately does do harm, because it does two things. The first thing it does is it creates the initial harm that they do themselves directly by creating a system that is now more limited for the people around them. That they no longer have the ability to use resources that this individual has chosen to keep for themselves. But the most damaging thing that it does is it creates a sense of permission. And the permission is, if I see a person with 10 bags of mega-sized toilet paper buying them all up, and I know what's going on in the society at large is that there is a concern about the health and well-being of that society in the immediate future, it will inspire me or make me feel entitled to do the same. I will see them doing that, and I will say to myself, maybe I wouldn't have done that, but if I don't join them, there will be none left for me later, because others will behave that way. My efforts or my well-intentioned forethought of thinking about what my own needs are, the needs of my my family or whoever I care for, I put them first, and I use my imagination. And I say, listen, I if I see this person doing it, it's very likely others will do it soon as well, and so I better do it first. Because if I don't, someone else will, and then I will go without. Now, this logic, when you think about it, makes perfect sense. It makes absolutely all the sense in the world. You don't know when the resource will be replenished, or even if it will be replenished, because you count on the selfishness of others to overwhelm the system. And so you participate inadvertently in creating the exact scenario you worry about. Right now, we have a major epidemic on our hands, a pandemic, to be specific, right? And what's happening is several tens of thousands of people have gotten sick. But the question is, has that had an actual direct impact on our ability to acquire supplies, food, resources, things we need, toilet paper? No, not really. I mean, the number of people that have gotten sick in the U.S., while obviously going to be continuing to grow, unfortunately, and we can talk about that later, it's not significant enough to actually impact the amount of resources that we would have in our grocery stores and other stores where we get the things we need. Instead, it's us that's doing it. We're the only ones causing this problem. And if we all were not as worried about other human beings' behavior, then ultimately this would be a lot less stressful for everybody, right? There would be a lot fewer people worrying about how they're going to get the things they need because they're not even available. Never mind the concerns of how we're going to pay for them. Now, one of the other details of the tragedy of the commons that's important to understand is its impact on sustainable resources and the concept of sustainability as a whole. So there's an excellent video, and I'll probably link it down below, that illustrates basically a group of fishermen and a pond that repopulates with fish. And they do the math and they figure out how many fish each fisherman needs to take in order for the population to remain the same, to not diminish over time. And what they realize is that if any one of them decides to take more than that, then the population will deplete. But the depleting population spurs on others to act in the same way, and you end up with an empty pond. Now, no one has anything. The same thing can be said about the environment, in fact. We have a certain amount of, I guess you could say, a lifeline, a fuse that's left on the planet's ability to withstand pollution. And our decisions to continue burning pollution, burning gasoline, burning fossil fuels in the atmosphere in an effort to exceed or to use up as much of it as we can, because it gives us an advantage over political or economic rivals, etc., or to sell it as much as we can because it gives us a financial benefit. Ultimately, we end up using up the resource to the point where we no longer have a sustainable ecosystem. The ecosystem collapses, and we know what goes on from there. So, what does all this have to do with, what's been going on? If it's not already obvious, it's self-inflicted. And it's a very difficult problem for an individual to wrestle with. If I know that the tragedy of the commons is a real phenomenon that happens with human beings, I know that it happens, then by choosing not to participate, I subject myself to being even further depleted in resources sooner than I would be if I was participating in it, right? If there's only X amount of toilet paper in the world, okay, just to continue on this ridiculous resource problem that we're having, and I choose not to overindulge in the consumption of that resource, then I only have the amount that I normally take in, and I will be depleted myself sooner than the population will be depleted. The only way to solve the issue of the tragedy of the commons is to get people to not only override their own survival instincts, but to get them to trust in other people, that they will also abide by those rules. Now, the most important connection I think I have for you guys tonight on why I'm bringing this up, not just to help people understand what's going on, but also to maybe find a possible solution, is to ask everyone to look at the behavior of people around you. A lot of people who are, especially in the many states now, that have been issued orders to remain indoors, and I am in one of those. There is, how do I say it? There is a certain percentage of people that are not abiding the rules, right? There's a certain percentage of the population that is ignoring the requests, recommendations, and legal actions, and declarations of our government, whether it be on the state or the federal level, and choosing to do things like spring break partying in Florida or whatever else you've been seeing on the news. But a significant portion of the population has been abiding the recommendations. More people have been cooperating with these requests that we, ultimately honor the choice to be safe. And our motives for this are pretty obvious. We want to stay alive, right? It's the same motive that causes the tragedy of the commons, in a sense. But what we're also noticing is that when we act collectively, we're able to actually mobilize in a way that we choose to be safer, but also much better at using our resources. Because we can't trust certain folks to abide by those rules, grocery stores and others, places around the country have put limits on the number of items an individual can purchase. You're no longer able to stack up 15,000 pounds of chicken and leave with the entire stock that the store had. You're now limited to a quantity of 2 in many places. And that helps make sure that everybody gets the resources that they need. The other thing that we're seeing is that ultimately a lot of people are staying inside, and as a result of a lack of commuting, going to work, a lack of just general travel outside of essential travel purposes, we're seeing a dramatic reduction around the world in the amount of pollution that's in the air. Less manufacturing in China, less traveling through the waterways over in Venice, less vehicles on the road in the United States. And all of these different things are giving our planet a little bit of a break on the constantly increasing amount of pollution that we see added to it on a daily basis. So, interestingly enough, when we have the appropriate motivation, staying alive, presented to us in a very compelling and immediate way, we're able to create results that we could never have created as individuals. I'm not a fan of communism, generally speaking, and when I mean generally, I mean almost completely. I am not a fan of authoritarianism. In fact, I'm exclusively opposed to authoritarian governments. It's one of the main reasons communism doesn't work, in my view. So these concepts we need to throw aside. But when we look at a situation like this, we have to try and consider what it is that we're actually doing by creating rationing in grocery stores, by looking at economic stimulus that puts money in the hands directly of people during times where they're not actually producing for the economy, or at least many of them aren't. What we're actually doing is a form of communism. What we're doing is, at very least, a form of socialism, where we are co-opting the resources of our country, including all of the privatized resources therein, and distributing them amongst people who may or may not be equally contributing. This is a very anti-capitalistic approach to doing things. And while a lot of people are concerned about that, it's probably worth noting the fact that we can see that in times like this, those systems have an actual genuine value. And more importantly, they are utterly superior at creating the kinds of solutions that we need in moments like this. So I'm not advocating for communism, and I don't think I ever will. I know a lot of people on the left are sort of seeing an evolution, right, in that direction. But I think that just like a lot of other guys out there, you really want to try and balance things. And that's what this whole thing is about. Creating an equilibrium between the resources and the people that need them, between the strengths of the individual companies and the governments that control them. When we create a harmonious balance in our resource consumption, in our societies, in our economic systems, what we come up with is a superior way to handle not only everyday problems, but severe ones like the ones that we're dealing with now. The Tragedy of the Commons is probably titled that way for very good reason, in that most tragedies have a bad ending. But if we're aware of our own destiny, if we're aware of the threat that lies directly in front of us, not in the distant future, but right in front of our eyes, and we choose as a society to act, what we can do is create an environment, a culture, an economic, and ecological system that will allow us to not only survive, but to thrive in it. I hope that people will learn about and discuss the tragedy of the commons in public and in public discourse, and perhaps bring it up to those folks in government and in our private sector in the finance world who do know about it, and demand that we do more to prevent the kinds of behaviors that create that tragedy from ever happening. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this topic, and I hope it illuminates a little bit about what's been going on and maybe helps you come up with some ideas of your own on how you think that we might be able to solve things going forward. Let me know what you think. I'll talk to you later.